We're used to countries getting a little bit of a rebrand. Names or flag changes are somewhat common. Even borders aren't set in stone. But how do larger border shifts occur? And has there ever been a case where a whole country lost most of its territory and then moved somewhere else entirely? Geographical renaming isn't an uncommon practice. On a smaller scale, a single street might end up changing its name to something more distinct. Meanwhile, in a much larger capacity, following various high-profile international treaties and negotiations, an entire country could adopt a brand new name that becomes recognized on the world stage. Commonly, these name changes occur as a result of a country seceding from another larger entity and declaring its independence, or when borders change and two countries join or are split as a result. Sometimes during the shift in borders, a place owned by one country could fall into the hands of another. Take the formerly Greek city of Constantinople, which was captured by the Ottomans in 1453 and renamed Istanbul by the Turks. Let's go bigger than one city though. How about a country? Ceylon is a great example. If you've never heard of it, that might be because it only had that name in the early 19th century, when it was part of the British Empire. But after declaring its independence, Ceylon changed its name to Sri Lanka and even removed all references to the country's old name in 2011 to sever ties with its colonial past. There are plenty of examples of this happening throughout history. Iran used to be known as the country of Persia to the Western world, but in March 1935, the government made a formal request to the countries it shared diplomatic relations with to refer to Persia as Iran, which is actually the name of the country in Persian. In 1989, Burma fell under military rule and as a result changed its name to Myanmar. But what happens when entire countries don't just change their name, but change their location entirely? Now you might hear that and immediately think of entire countries physically moving from one part of the world to another. And while in the real world nobody is building enormous high-tech rocket boosters to lift entire countries into the sky, the idea of land masses moving is not entirely unfounded. The theory of continental drift is widely associated with this idea. It's a geographical hypothesis that suggests the large continental land masses of our planet, Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Antarctica, Europe, and Australia, have been gradually moving over time. This all happened because of the shifting of large tectonic plates underwater triggered by heat rising from within the Earth's core. While continental drift definitely serves as an explanation for how a country could physically move from one place to another, the Earth's been around for 4.5 billion years, and human civilization has only existed for a fraction of that time. So, how is it possible multiple countries have changed locations through the course of human history, some even as recent as within the prior century? Well, the answer is actually surprisingly simple. Certain major world events can cause borders to change. Countries have occupied the territories of other countries and even incorporated them as a whole since the start of human civilization, often wiping their name off the map. There's actually a recent example of just that. Despite seeming like a long time ago, in hindsight, the events of the Second World War, which took place between 1939 and 1945, only culminated 78 years ago. And given that the conflict took place not only within the most recent 100 years, but also on such a massive global scale, the lasting effects of the war can still be seen in certain places around the world to this day. Perhaps most of all in Europe, where our first example of a country changing location can be found. The country of Poland is bordered by Germany on the west, by Slovakia and the Czech Republic to the south, Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania to the east, and part of Russia borders it on the north. During World War II, Poland was stuck between a rock and a hard place, with the Soviet Union to its east and Nazi Germany to the west, with both eyeing up the territory. In fact, both of Poland's neighbors would invade the country in 1939, partitioning the country into two sides. This invasion was outlined as part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which also included a non-aggression clause that prevented either side from directly attacking the other. This famously only lasted for 2 years before Operation Barbarossa was launched into the USSR by the Nazis. However, while a portion of Poland was under his control, Adolf Hitler annexed areas that had formerly been parts of Germany. Poland as a country had only been reformed less than 20 years prior thanks to the Treaty of Versailles, which had ended World War I. Now, 17 years later, Poland as a country had been divided by both invading sides, the eastern side incorporated into the USSR and the west under the control of the Nazis, wiping its name off the map. Following the end of World War II in 1945, Poland was restored following the unconditional surrender of the Nazis to the Allied forces. However, the country had to literally move west after the war. That's because most of the land taken by the Soviets in 1939 remained under the control of the USSR. As compensation, Poland's international border underwent a major change and was shifted so that the west side of the country now contained what was known as the recovered territories, land that had been originally part of Eastern Germany before the war began. Nowadays, the center of modern-day Poland is several hundred miles west of where the country's geographic center had previously been located back in 1939. Sadly, though, many of the country's residents were never compensated, and many never fully recovered from losing what was once their property in eastern Poland pre-World War II. In fact, many in the eastern Polish region that became part of Russia suffered greatly under the regime of Joseph Stalin. War is brutal, and it often results in major border changes. In the case of Poland, this involved a bit of an eastern shuffle of their entire country. For our next example, we'll keep it a bit more peaceful and move further west from Poland to the Netherlands, where the Dutch were once actually able to geographically change their entire country. If you were to look at a map of the Netherlands from the 21st century and then compare it to one from the 19th century, you might struggle to notice any differences between them. Don't worry, this isn't one of those impossible spot-the-difference puzzles. Pay close attention to the area in the center of the Netherlands, the Zuiderzee, a shallow bay of the North Sea. Now we're getting somewhere. What could that small landmass on the newer map in the 21st century be? And where the heck did it appear from if it wasn't there in the 19th century? Well, that's the newest province of the Netherlands, known as Flevoland. This area was officially recognized as part of the Netherlands in 1986, only 37 years ago, but the effort to reclaim it began just over 100 years ago in 1918. But unlike in previous examples of territories being reclaimed and absorbed into a new country following a war, Flevoland was instead reclaimed from the sea itself. 2 years prior, in 1916, the area closest to the Zuiderzee experienced a devastating flood following a storm surge. Levees along the coastline suffered severe ruptures thanks to a high water inflow within the rivers, and this structural damage caused that excess to decimate the area. A number of wooden houses were completely washed away in the flood, while 19 people were killed in North Holland. Meanwhile, at sea, a further 32 casualties were caused by related shipwrecks. In the aftermath, the levees keeping the Zuiderzee Bay had to be reinforced in order to tame the waters and prevent another flood. It had become a dangerous inland body of water, but someone had been drafting up a plan to enclose this new hazard. Cornelis Lely was the Dutch Minister for Water Management during the time, and fortunately also happened to be a civil engineer. With the support of the Dutch Parliament, Zuiderzee works were put into place in 1918 and followed Lely's plan to enclose the Zuiderzee and partially drain the excess water that had been left behind by the flooding 2 years prior. The construction of multiple artificial embankments, all several kilometers in length, successfully led to a portion of the Zuiderzee being turned into a lake, far shallower and more manageable. That's right, a large area of the sea had to be gradually pumped dry, and the water moved to make room for land. This feat of engineering intended to create a province with an abundance of new living space and farmland for the Dutch people. The effort resulted in the reclamation of the province of Flevoland, changing the geography of the Netherlands for good. Cartographers had to throw out all their old maps and draw up some new ones that included the brand new province. Although it wasn't officially recognized until 1986, the area of Flevoland was widely inhabited beforehand, and this example of Dutch ingenuity and engineering was even exported around the world. Their knowledge of creating and reclaiming new land from the sea proving to come in pretty handy in some other places. For example, the Palm Islands of Dubai were created in a similar way, even with direct help from Dutch engineers. And as for old Cornelis Lely, without whom none of this would have been possible, his contributions weren't quickly forgotten. The capital city of Flevoland was named Lelystad in his honor, and the statue of the man himself stands on the western point of one of the dams that was constructed to help enclose and redirect water from the flood in 1916. But borders that are redefined after turbulent world events or physically creating new land masses from underwater aren't the only ways that countries can change locations. Over the course of human history, various conquering forces have traveled from one part of the world to another and brought their own unique cultures with them, with some even declaring their newfound countries as part of their homeland by extension. We already made the passing reference to the British Empire earlier in the video, where this was often the case. The expansive reach of this brutal colonial rule over many parts of the world did make various countries part of its empire, but it also had a negative effect of stifling a lot of these countries' development. One such example that matches this pattern of a people migrating from one part of the world to another is the country of Bulgaria. Historians have long debated where the exact origin point might be for the earliest ancestors of what we know today as the Bulgarian people. Historical experts are yet to reach a consensus, but many have theorized that up until approximately the 7th century, the earliest precursors of modern-day Bulgarians, known as the Bulgars, were situated somewhere within the continent of Asia. It's around this time it's theorized that the Bulgar people migrated and settled in areas of what's now known as Ukraine and Crimea, bringing them closer to the Black Sea. This was where they established what we in the modern age would come to refer to as Old Great Bulgaria, a nomadic empire spanning from the southern parts of Ukraine to the southwest portions of Russia. The country of Old Great Bulgaria lasted between the years of 632 and 668, and during this time would expand west to absorb territory of the Pannonian Avars. They were an alliance formed of several other European nomadic peoples. The Old Great Bulgaria also had to contend with the Khazars to the east, another group of nomads hungry for expansion. As tensions boiled over, an alliance between the Avars and the Slavic people pushed back against the Bulgars in the west, while the Khazars invaded parts of Great Bulgaria in the east. Eventually, the Khazars would conquer Old Great Bulgaria, causing the country to split into 5 parts and prompting the migration of the Bulgars out of the area. This destruction of the early country scattered the Bulgars to various regions of Europe, sending them toward areas such as Greece and Italy. Smaller communities of Bulgarians existed throughout. However, 2 successors of Old Great Bulgaria would eventually form. The first of these was the Volga Bulgaria, existing north of the former location of the Old Great Bulgaria, along the Volga River. The second of these was the First Bulgarian Empire, which migrated to the region where modern-day Bulgaria is now located. However, it also stretched into parts of Ukraine, Romania, and the rest of the Balkans. The Mongols launched an invasion into Volga Bulgaria that lasted from 1223 to 1236. Meanwhile, although the First Bulgarian Empire was toppled and replaced by various other ruling entities over the years, the Bulgarian people remained relatively fixed to the area that they had settled in. Following their independence from Ottoman rule, Bulgaria as we know it today was established in the area. As we mentioned at the beginning, no one has invented the technology to put rockets under a country and shoot it off to a different part of the planet. Even so, the nomads of the past did manage to migrate as an entity, leading to entire cultures and thus countries moving around the world despite the lack of rockets. Another country known to have changed its location is Hungary. The origins of what we now consider to be Hungary can actually be traced back to the migration of another people, the Magna. They originated from Magna Hungaria, also known as Ancient Hungary, which was the ancestral home of the Hungarian people. Based on historical findings, the exact location of Magna Hungaria was likely somewhere in Eastern Europe, possibly between the Volga River and the southern Ural Mountains, an area that's now part of modern-day Russia. During the 9th and 10th century, the Magna people migrated westward away from their ancestral home as part of a conquest of the Carpathian Basin. Hungarian soldiers were familiar with the areas within the region thanks to them being hired as mercenaries by other European powers at the time, in particular the aforementioned First Bulgarian Empire. Eventually, this pushed the Magna people closer to what we now know as Hungary, where they were able to permanently establish themselves within the region. This migration had begun almost 3,000 miles away during a time when traveling such a great distance was far more perilous, which makes it all the more impressive if you think about it. Beginning in an earlier country known as Magyar Usája near the Ural Mountains, then moving to Magna Hungaria only to head further southwest toward their present-era home. Let's move now from Europe to South Asia, although we're just observing, not moving any countries over there. Here we can look back at the history to the 16th century to find the Mughal Empire. For almost 2 centuries, this early modern empire spanned from northern parts of what we now know as Afghanistan to South India, encompassing the peninsular part of the Indian subcontinent known as the Deccan Plateau. A warrior chieftain from what is nowadays Uzbekistan named Babur is credited with establishing the Mughal Empire. Thanks to his alliance with the Ottomans, Babur's forces were provided with cannons and early guns that aided in the expansion of the empire's territories. At one point in time, the Mughal Empire encompassed and controlled almost the entire Indian subcontinent. So, what happened? Why didn't the Mughal Empire consolidate all the countries that it once reigned over? Well, for one, the Mughal Empire wasn't big on suppressing the cultures of other countries that they conquered. Whereas some empires throughout history have tried to replace an invaded land's traditions with its own, the Mughal Empire saw the value in incorporating the cultures of the various places it ruled over, effectively giving each new territory an equal part to play in the growing empire. Despite expanding primarily through the use of warfare and military force, the Mughal Empire maintained a relative state of peace throughout most of the 17th century. However, between 1707 and 1720, the empire's rapid growth and prosperity began to decline, with the then emperor losing much of his power, and many of the officers in their military losing faith in the central authority that ruled the empire. This would eventually cause them to lose the Mughals' ancestral homeland of Uzbekistan. Much of their military defeat was suffered in the northernmost part of the empire, while much of their victories allowed for expansion into the south. The example of the Mughal Empire is a special one, as they were almost constantly changing their location until their conclusive emperor died in 1720. At this point, the presence of the Mughal Empire was reduced, but still encompassed territories near and around India, right up until they were formally dissolved in 1857, following the Indian Rebellion. The continuous changes in location that were incurred by the Mughal Empire can be charted as they occurred throughout history, from their beginnings in Uzbekistan to their eventual end in Old Delhi. But there's no doubt that they had a significant presence throughout their existence. But what would happen if a country just disappeared from its original place on the globe, only to later reappear somewhere else? As impossible as it sounds, this actually happened in the country of Ghana. In West Africa between 300 AD and 1100 AD, ancient Ghana was the heart of the Ghana Empire, existing in what is now Mauritania and Mali. Although archaeologists have struggled to unearth native written records of it, plenty of non-native accounts translated from medieval Arabic have confirmed the empire's existence. Interestingly, the location of ancient Ghana was further north than its modern-day counterpart, which resides on the west coast of Africa, with the Atlantic Ocean to its south. So, how did ancient Ghana seemingly vanish only to reappear many centuries later? Well, the empire itself eventually decayed and became part of the neighboring Mali Empire, effectively removing the country of ancient Ghana from existence for quite some time. Hundreds of years later, an area south of where ancient Ghana existed was colonized by Britain and became known as the Gold Coast. Then in 1957, the country was able to achieve independence thanks to a campaign of protests against the British. As a result, the British Gold Coast became what we now know as Ghana, effectively causing the ancient West African country to move southwards after having disappeared over 850 years prior. Now satiate your thirst for map knowledge once again with the real reason Yugoslavia collapsed, or check out this video instead.